You know, looking back, it's strange how some of the most ordinary nights can turn into memories you'll never quite shake off. This story happened a few years ago, right in the middle of those long, quiet months when everyone was stuck at home. I was living alone in a small town on the coast of Maine, nothing fancy. Just a quiet place with a lot of foggy mornings and the sound of seagulls pretty much all day. Like a lot of people, I was getting restless. There's only so much TV you can watch before you start feeling like the walls are closing in. I'd started chatting with people online just to pass the time. That's how I ended up talking to a girl named Riley. We'd followed each other on social media for a while, but never really hung out. She lived just a few blocks away, so eventually, after a few weeks of messaging, we decided to meet up. It was a Thursday night, and there wasn't much to do. Everything was closed, and the streets were empty. Riley suggested we go for a drive, just to get out of the house for a bit. I picked her up around 9 p.m. She hopped in the car with a big grin and a couple of cans of ginger beer. We drove around for a while, windows down, just talking about nothing in particular. After a bit, Riley brought up the old lighthouse on the edge of town. It's called Harbor Point Lighthouse. It's been there for over 100 years, perched on a rocky cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The place is usually off limits after sunset, but Riley said she'd been there before at night, and it was worth seeing. I was a little hesitant about sneaking onto the grounds, but Riley seemed confident. She said the caretaker only came by during the day, and besides, who would be out there in the middle of the week? I figured, why not? It's not like we had anything better to do. We parked the car on a side street and walked the rest of the way. The air was cool and the sky was clear with just a sliver of moonlight. As we got closer, the lighthouse came into view, its beams sweeping slowly across the dark water. There was something peaceful about it, but also a little eerie. The only sounds were the waves crashing against the rocks and the distant call of a night bird. Riley led the way, hopping over a low fence and motioning for me to follow. We kept our voices low and used our phone flashlights to see the path. The grass was damp and the ground sloped down toward the cliffs. We made our way around to the back of the lighthouse, where there's a narrow trail that runs along the edge. Locals call it the lantern path. It's a little risky in the dark, but Riley seemed to know where she was going. We sat down on a flat rock, looking out at the water. For a while, we just talked and listened to the ocean. It felt good to be outside, away from all the noise and stress of the world. After about 20 minutes, we decided to walk a bit further along the path, just to see how far it went. That's when things started to feel a little off. As we walked, I kept thinking I heard footsteps behind us, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. Riley noticed it too. She stopped and whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. We both stood still, listening. The wind picked up, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was just the sound of the grass moving. But then, clear as day, we heard gravel crunching behind us. We turned our lights back toward the path. About 20 feet away, there was a figure standing just at the edge of the light. He was wearing a long coat and a beanie pulled low over his face. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching us. I tried to keep my voice steady and called out, "Hey, do you need something?" No answer. He just kept staring. Riley squeezed my arm, and I could tell she was nervous. I tried to sound casual and said, "We're just leaving." "Sorry if we're not supposed to be here." Still, nothing from the guy. He didn't move, didn't speak. We decided to keep walking, hoping he'd just let us go. As we moved down the path, I kept glancing back. The man started following us, keeping the same distance. He didn't run or shout, just walked at a steady pace. It was one of those moments where you can't tell if you're overreacting or if something is really wrong. We picked up our pace, trying not to look like we were running. The path was narrow and slippery in places, so we had to be careful. All the while, the man stayed behind us, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. When we finally reached the end of the lantern path, we cut across the grass toward the lighthouse parking lot. That's when we saw two more people coming from the other direction. They were both wearing dark clothes and moving quickly, like they were trying to meet us at the lot. Riley grabbed my hand, and we started walking faster. I didn't want to panic, but my heart was pounding. I whispered to Riley that we should just get to the car and lock the doors. We didn't say anything to the two new guys as we passed them, but they watched us closely, not smiling or saying hello. As soon as we got to the car, I unlocked it and we both jumped in. I hit the lock button just as I saw the three figures closing in on us. One of them tried the back door handle, and another knocked on the window. I started the engine, trying to keep calm, and slowly backed out of the spot. One of the guys slapped the trunk as we pulled away, but none of them chased us. We drove in silence for a few minutes, both of us breathing hard. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following us, but there was nothing. After a while, Riley let out a shaky laugh and said, "Well, that was more excitement than I needed tonight." We didn't talk much on the way back. I dropped her off at her apartment, and we both agreed not to go back to the lighthouse at night again. The next day, I told a couple of friends what happened. They thought maybe it was just some local kids messing around, but I'm not so sure. There was something about the way those guys acted, silent, watching, not saying a word, that just didn't feel right. Riley and I stayed friends after that, but we stuck to more normal hangouts. Every now and then, I'll drive past Harbor Point Lighthouse during the day and think about that night. I still wonder what those people were doing out there, and what might have happened if we hadn't left when we did. It's strange how a place that seems so peaceful in the daylight can feel completely different at night. I've never gone back after dark, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. Some memories are just better left alone. One morning, as I was flipping through the local paper, I spotted a small ad for a lighthouse keeper. It sounded odd, but the pay was decent, and it came with a place to stay. I'd never worked at a lighthouse before, but I figured I could learn. I called the number in the ad, spoke to a man who seemed in a hurry, and by the end of the day, the job was mine. I packed a bag, said goodbye to Anna and Eli over the phone, and caught the early bus out to the coast. The lighthouse was far from any town, perched on a stretch of rocky shoreline where the waves crashed day and night. The building itself was old, with peeling paint and windows fogged over by salt. When I arrived, the air was thick with the smell of seaweed and the cries of gulls. Flying overhead, I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The place looked lonely, but I hoped it would be a fresh start. I found the key just where the instructions said it would be tucked behind a loose stone near the door. Inside, The lighthouse was even dustier than I'd expected. Cobwebs hung in the corners, and the furniture looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I set my bag down and got to work, sweeping the floors and wiping down the windows. It took most of the day, but by evening, I had the small living area looking halfway decent. That first night, I sat on the old sofa with a sandwich and a cup of tea. The wind howled outside, and the only light came from a single lamp on the table. I thought about Anna and Eli, wondering if they'd be proud of me for taking this job. I missed them more than I wanted to admit. Before long, I drifted off to sleep, the sound of the waves in the background. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange feeling. It was as if someone was in the room with me. I sat up and looked around, but the place was empty. I tried to shake it off and went back to sleep, telling myself it was just nerves. The next morning, I explored the rest of the lighthouse. There were narrow stairs leading up to the lamp room and a few doors that were stuck shut. I found a storeroom at the back, locked with a rusty padlock. I made a mental note to look for the key later. After lunch, I took a walk along the shore. The rocks were slippery, and the wind nearly knocked me over, but the view was beautiful. I saw a few fishing boats in the distance and wondered what it would be like to live out here year-round. When I got back, I called Anna to let her know I was settling in. She sounded tired, but happy to hear from me. Eli got on the phone and told me about a drawing he'd made at school. I promised him I'd send pictures of the lighthouse soon. That evening, as I was making dinner, I heard something strange, a soft voice, almost like a child's, humming a tune. I paused, listening, but it faded away. I figured it was just the wind or maybe the pipes in the walls. I finished my meal and tried to put it out of my mind, but that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the voice again. This time, it was clearer. It sounded like a little girl singing a simple rhyme. Sam, Sam, can I call? Did you see my doll? My name isn't Sam, but in that moment, it felt like the voice was meant for me. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked around the room. There was no one there. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I searched the lighthouse for anything that might explain the voice. I found old photographs in a drawer, black and white pictures of a family standing on the steps outside. There was a man, a woman, and a young girl holding a doll. The back of one photo said, "Summer, 1972. I wondered what had happened to them. Later, I found the key to the storeroom wedged behind a loose floorboard. I hesitated before unlocking the door, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, the air was cold and musty. There were boxes stacked against the walls, and, in the middle of the room, an old wooden trunk. I knelt down and opened it. Inside the trunk was a small, worn-out doll and an old blanket. The doll's face was faded, and one of its arms was missing. As I stared at it, I heard the voice again, right behind me. Sam, Sam, can I call? Did you see my doll? I spun around, but the room was empty. I grabbed the trunk lid and slammed it shut, heart racing. I left the storeroom and locked the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the doll's face and heard that voice. The days passed slowly. I kept busy with chores and tried to ignore the strange things happening around me. Sometimes, I'd find the storeroom door open, even though I knew I'd locked it. Other times, I'd hear footsteps upstairs, but when I checked, no one was There, I started to feel like I was being watched. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. The sky turned dark, and thunder rattled the windows. I made sure the lighthouse lamp was working, then settled in for a long night. As the wind howled outside, I heard the voice again, louder than before. It sounded like it was coming from the stairs. I grabbed a flashlight and went to investigate. The beam flickered as I climbed the steps. When I reached the top, I saw a shadow move across the wall. I called out, but there was no answer. I checked every room, but found nothing. Back downstairs, I noticed the storeroom door was open again. I shined my light inside and saw the trunk. In the middle of the floor, the lid was open and the doll was sitting upright, facing the doorway. I slowly approached, feeling a chill run down my spine. As I reached for the trunk, the doll fell over and I heard the voice one more time, "Sam. Sam, can I call? Did you see my doll?" This time, it sounded sad, almost like a plea. I picked up the doll and held it for a moment. It felt cold and heavy in my hands. I put the doll back in the trunk, closed the lid, and left the storeroom. I decided to sit outside for a while, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The storm had passed, and the sky was full of stars. I sat on the steps, listening to the waves and thinking about everything that had happened. As dawn approached, I saw a small boat coming toward the shore. An older man climbed out and walked up to the lighthouse. He introduced himself as a fisherman who visited the area from time to time. We sat together on the steps, and I told him about the strange things I'd experienced. He listened quietly, then nodded. He said he'd heard stories about the lighthouse for years, about a family who lived there long ago and a little girl who disappeared one night. Some folks said her spirit never left, and that she still wandered the halls looking for her lost doll. I asked him if he thought the stories were true. He shrugged and said, "Some places hold onto their memories. Maybe this is one of them." He offered to give me a ride to the next town, but I told him I needed to stay a little longer to try and make sense of it all. After he left, I sat alone on the steps, watching the sun rise over the water. I thought about Anna and Eli and how much I wanted to bring them here, but I also wondered if this was the right place for us. The lighthouse was beautiful in its own way, but it felt heavy with the weight of old stories. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences became less frequent. The voice faded and the storeroom door stayed shut. I focused on my work, keeping the lamp burning and the place tidy. I called Anna every night, telling her about my day and listening to her stories about Eli. Eventually, I started to feel at home. The loneliness didn't bother me as much, and the lighthouse felt less intimidating. I even found myself talking to the walls sometimes, just to hear another voice. Looking back, I still don't know exactly what happened during those first weeks at the lighthouse. Maybe it was all in my head, or maybe some places really do hold on to the past. Either way, I learned that even the loneliest places can teach you something about yourself. I want to share a story that my friend Mark told me last summer. Mark's been working with the National Marine Service for over 10 years. He's the kind of person who's always practical and honest. Definitely not someone who gets caught up in ghost stories or superstitions. He's always been a steady, reliable guy. So, when he told me this, I knew he wasn't making it up. This happened back in 2018. when Mark was assigned to do a 2-week maintenance rotation at a lighthouse called Falcon Rock off the coast of Nova Scotia. The place is really remote. Two can only reach it by boat, and sometimes, if the weather's bad, not even that. Falcon Rock is basically just a small, rocky island with a single lighthouse and a storage shed for equipment and supplies. There's no electricity from the mainland, no running water, and barely any cell service. The lighthouse is mostly automated, but it still needs people to check on it once in a while. Usually, these maintenance trips are solo, but the year before, there had been some weird technical problems. So this time, they sent two people, Mark and another technician named Greg. The first few days were pretty uneventful. The weather was windy, and the work was repetitive, checking the beacon, testing backup batteries, refueling the generator, and scraping off rust and salt. At night, they'd eat, read, and play cards. It was quiet and isolated, but that was expected. Nothing out of the ordinary. But on the fourth night, Mark woke up around 2 in the morning with a strange feeling, not exactly scared, but uneasy, like something was off. He said the air felt heavy, almost like the pressure before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was clear. He glanced out the window and noticed that the lighthouse beacon wasn't moving. That was a big problem. The light is supposed to rotate all night, no matter what. Mark woke Greg, and together they climbed the spiral staircase to the top of the tower. The gears that turned the beacon were still humming, but the light itself was stuck. When they checked the mechanism, they found something odd. A big, dark scarf was jammed deep in the gears. It was soaked through and smelled like seaweed and mold. They pulled it out, tossed it outside, and figured it was just some weird fluke. The room had been locked, and the windows were closed, so they couldn't figure out how it got there. Maybe a bird dropped it, they guessed, and went back to bed. The next night, though, the same thing happened. Around 2 in the morning, the beacon stopped again. This time, it was a faded blue jacket sleeve, also wet and covered in bits of shell and sand, somehow tangled in the machinery. That's when it stopped feeling like a coincidence. Mark and Greg checked every door and window, making sure everything was locked tight. They even started blocking the staircase with crates and double-checking the locks before bed. On the 7th night, Mark woke up to the sound of Greg talking quietly in the dark. At first, he thought Greg was talking to him, but when he asked what he said, Greg just looked confused and said he hadn't been talking at all. Later that night, Mark found Greg sitting by the window, staring out at the rocks below. Greg said he'd seen someone down there the night before, just at the edge of the light, watching the lighthouse. When the beacon swung past, the figure disappeared. After that, Greg started acting differently. He barely slept, stopped talking much, and spent most of his time looking out the window. When Mark asked him what was wrong, Greg would mumble about hearing noises in the walls and voices on the stairs. On the 9th night, both of them heard footsteps on the spiral staircase. Slow, heavy, and deliberate. They stayed perfectly still and listened. The footsteps stopped, and the silence that followed was even worse. That night, they pushed a heavy table in front of their bedroom door and slept with their work knives close by. On the 11th night, they were woken again by the beacon stopping. But this time, the door to the beacon room wasn't just open, it was wide open, as if someone had forced it. The wind was howling through the tower. Inside, the beacon had been tampered with. The heavy bulb had been unscrewed and left standing. Upright in the middle of the floor, Greg kept pointing at the wall, whispering that he saw a hand come out of the bricks. Mark said he felt something cold brush against his back, but when he turned around, no one was there. They ran down the stairs and locked themselves in their room for the rest of the night. Mark didn't sleep at all. Greg just sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, muttering to someone who wasn't there the next morning. Mark used the emergency satellite phone to call for an early pickup. He told the office there was a serious mechanical problem and they needed to leave as soon as possible. When the boat finally arrived, phone either. On the ride back to the mainland, Greg didn't say a word, not to Mark, not to anyone. He quit the National Marine Service soon after and never explained what happened out there. Mark still does maintenance work, but he's made it clear he'll never go back to Falcon Rock. He says some places just aren't meant for people to stay in for too long. I still think about Mark's story sometimes, especially when I see a lighthouse in the distance or hear about someone working alone in a remote place. It's easy to feel safe when you're surrounded by people and noise, but isolation can do strange things, and sometimes it's not just your imagination. Thanks for listening to this story. If you've ever had a strange experience in a lonely place, let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more true stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and stick around for the next episode.